Well, happy Friday, everybody. What another challenging week it's been for all of us in privacy and AI and tech policy generally. Well, let's talk about a couple of things. Well, to start on a positive note, just want to flag our annual Privacy Papers for Policymakers event here in DC. We often host it on the Hill, but the logistics are always challenging getting into the building, last minute votes, the Capitol Visitor Center, restrictions on which caterers you can use. So we're hosting it at the very nice event space in our building. Easier. We'll have the same VIP moderators from the world of policy and authors of a number of really great papers. The date and details, it's about 2 weeks away, are on our website. Some of the papers, let me just grab this here. Some of the papers are ones that if you're in academia, you read because they got a lot of attention in academic circles. But if you are on the Hill or in policy or global or just busy because you deal with stuff day to day urgently, you may not have had time to read these papers. And now is your chance to, well, show up and hear a description and a discussion. Read the digest. We provide a kind of a one-pager that the authors provide us, so you can get the gist, decide if you're interested or just want an overview. One paper is called Authoritarian Privacy. It is about China and privacy and data protection in China. There's always this assumption that, well, China doesn't care about that. And yes, of course, there are always significant exceptions for government and so forth. But China has passed significant data protection regulation. PIPL has passed some informal but increasingly significant AI rules. And understanding the strategy, given this entire debate about competing with China, beating China, and regulation in the US that doesn't limit AI so that US companies can win. Obviously, China is who they are looking to win over, and how is China dealing with regulation, and how is it, as an authoritarian state, influencing others? Anyway, really thoughtful paper by a scholar at Georgetown University Law Center. Important, I think, for people to understand. The other paper I'll mention, hot issue of the day, of course, is scraping for AI, and how does that intersect with privacy? And the eminent Dan Solov and his frequent co-author Woody Hartzog have another seminal paper, The Great Scrape, Clash Between Scraping and Privacy. I don't need to say more about that, but you'll want to read it and you'll want to hear them talk about it. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Alex Sang, global head of AI ethics at Sony Group, lead research scientist at Sony AI. Really interesting paper as a both technical expert as well as company researcher, how she frames some of the challenges around fairness and measuring to assess bias. Very practical, useful paper. Another one of the winning papers from Alicia Solo-Niederman, GW Law School, The Overturn Window and Privacy Enforcement. That's her take at the scope of FTC authority. Again, super relevant to many of us. And we'll have a spicy discussion there. Personhood credentials, Steve Adler, leading AI scientist. I think he just recently left OpenAI. You've seen some of the debate around World and WorldCoin and the iris scanning orbs that they've created to try to create a privacy-friendly, but obviously yet to be debated as to the right structure for that sort of technology. So with its controversies, this is a sophisticated paper about the techniques to identify that somebody is human online. Can this be done in a privacy-friendly way when we need to know who is an AI and who is a bot and so forth? So really important. And then the final one that I'll mention by Miranda Bogan. Miranda is a senior staffer at CDT, their AI governance lab, but worked at Meta and had some real hands-on exposure. And she did a paper on navigating demographic measurement for fairness and equity. You'll want to hear these. But we also know that lots of people are job hunting now because they've lost jobs, they're worried about losing jobs in government, out of government. So we've got a reception and we enjoy meeting and talking, but we encourage people who are job seeking or want to be there to support, and maybe you've got a job to fill, or maybe you just want to open up some lines of communication and be supportive to so many people in government and out of government that are in movement now. There are a couple of honorable mentions that I do want to mention. The Law of AI for Good by Orly Lobel, also really worth a read. Dennis Hirsch has a great paper on aligning algorithmic risk assessment values. Anyway, the winning papers, the details, it's all online. Go to the events page, please, at the fpf.org site. It's free. There's usually good food, good networking. I myself will not be there. I'm going to be in Victoria, in Canada. Got a keynote at the Reboot conference and a sort of stakeholder meeting there with a number of regulators and companies. So I unfortunately won't be there, but the team will be here. Our senior staff will be here, and I invite you to join us. And if you are in the job market, I really invite you to join and come on out and do some networking, and you never know. Other news this week, I guess we all saw Apple pulling back their secure encrypted cloud option for folks in the UK. Sad outcome, understandable. Apple doesn't want to comply with the mandate that the UK insisted on to create what they see as a security flaw that could be exploited by others in their cloud, rather not promise people a promise you can't live up to, or be forced to invent a real flaw to encryption. You'll find under the resources on our site an infographic we did showing how important encryption is in the daily life of everybody that we did a couple of years ago, but we just updated it because sometimes the reason that law enforcement says they need access is kid safety, child porn, all these sorts of things, child abuse material, I should say. And I think we wanted to show how encryption actually is critical to protecting kids, and it's a really useful document infographic that may be useful if you need to understand the many ways that encryption might show up in a kid's life in the course of a day, or use it if you need to work with policymakers or others at a company. A lot of conversations this week with companies, CPOs, some in government and out of government. How has the current political environment, don't regulate AI winning, how has the changing appetite for risk in industry affected people working in privacy and compliance and AI? And I guess this is a trend that started a bit with the ChatGPT launch, right? I mean, other leading companies had models that were chatbots and types of generative AI. And because of the concerns around accuracy and concerns around different kinds of risk, put them out and then drew them back, right? When was it Tay, the Microsoft chatbot, was accused of being racist, they pulled it back, so we can't go there. And OpenAI sort of showed that the demand for these tools in the world, given how leaps have been made in making these things effective, was huge, and people rushed forward. And we still have a lot of legal questions, and everyone has accepted the risk, right? We don't fully understand the IP issues. They're still being litigated. We don't understand the compliance with GDPR issues. They're still under a lot of pressure and scrutiny. Industry accepted the risk. Government agencies accepted the risk. But we did see a lot of work hiring people to deal with AI governance because of an awareness that you don't want to mess up and violate laws, violate your consumers, mess up with your partners. And now, with the new dynamic in the US, pushing back at EU regulation, pushing back at state regulation, no immediate hopes of a federal level AI bill, the administration first taking input as to what an AI strategy should be, but certainly already laying out, a strategy of winning and rapid speed and competing with China, competing with the world. Corporate leaders have gotten a message that move forward. They wanted to move forward. They were already moving forward, but they've gotten perhaps the message that the FTC or regulators are going to have the message of providing runway. I think it's yet to be seen. The FTC previously, even with current commissioners on clear cases, took action. What nuances will be different and how that changes is, I think, yet to be clear. Obviously, certain priorities that have not been on the plate of the FTC around content moderation, and can that be a consumer protection issue if you do too much, or you don't do it fairly, or don't do it well, or you focus just on one sector to the extent of others. Those are going to take up a lot of time. So exactly what that means for AI regulation is, I think, confusing. But we are seeing an impact on the people who work in this area. A number of very senior roles are changing. I don't want to say more. Lots of less visible senior roles have changed and are under pressure. And then lots of current people are telling us that they're seeing a different appetite for risk acceptance. Now, look, there has always been part of our community who saw their role as identifying the risks, legal and others, but it was up to the business to make the decision. There are others who I think took a heavier hand and who saw their job as putting themselves in front of those issues. Certainly during my days at AOL and DoubleClick, I mean, I was there. I had a reputation. I cared. I was there to ensure. I took very personally that the company did well, did right. I felt it reflected on me, and I had a role where I was empowered to have that voice. And I spoke up, and I didn't win all. I didn't win every, but I felt I was having a real positive impact. And I think there are many who are in it for those reasons. Yes, in the end, it might be the business or the general counsel's role to accept the risk, but it was our role and is our role to be a loud voice and to make it very clear that if you are accepting a risk that we think is unacceptable for the company, for consumers, for legal concerns, that you're doing it, over our significant objections. And when things go wrong, you'll be held accountable because you understood and heard that what you were doing was a mistake, right? There's always been an audience that didn't go that far. And so for them, they are observing that the industry, the business is accepting more risk. But others are being told, no, you don't have that right to block things. Don't be a barrier, or recognize and calibrate that it's a bigger risk to not be out there when other competitors are, when there is a national imperative. So seeing a little bit of a slowdown in a rush to hire and hire and hire around, fairness and bias, areas where some companies are thinking their bigger risk is not being in the market out there in the front, or their bigger risk is being accused of doing too much to censor or being too restrictive, as opposed to and being accused of being too woke about it, as opposed to rolling out products and being accused of doing something that's biased and unfair. We are seeing some companies where the internal people are doing what I think we used to do in the earlier days. In my early days, when we didn't have all the state laws and we didn't have GDPR, you made your case that this was bad for trust, this was bad for consumers. People would not like the product, that there would be bad media stories, advocates would be upset, consumers would be upset, it would hurt the brand. And that was hard. I mean, I used to always reserve some money in my budget to do a survey and a study, so I actually had the metrics. Because if you simply say to the business, the consumers don't like it, they're like, we understand who likes our product and we've done all the testing and we say it's fine, right? And I needed to have, the numbers to say, well, here's what the reality is. here's what people said to us when we had them asked in a fair and neutral way. So a little bit more of a turn from, oh, there's legal risk here, when the business is saying, well, where's the enforcement, or is there really legal risk here, or I'm ready to accept that chance. It doesn't seem so significant because of the utility of the data or the business opportunity. I do warn people that there is enforcement happening at the state level in a significant way. Obviously, when it comes to California, some might say, well, where's all the enforcement? The CCPA, to its credit, has confidentiality rules. If there's a settlement or there's a action, one will hear about it. But if there are investigations, and there are, I hear this from many, and they're not yet public, but there are some many significant investigations happening. They're just not public. So unfortunately, we don't know about them. And if they were all public or all announced and concluded, you might see a lot of fear and worry that, wait a second, these rules are serious and there really is enforcement. But these things take time. They're big cases. They're first time. Companies are really not capitulating easily. They want to set precedent. But there is a lot of room to be concerned about legal enforcement. And obviously, GDPR didn't go away. GDPR is the first line, as Gabriela Zanfa-Fortuna, our global lead, always states quite clearly. GDPR is the AI regulation today, more significant at this point, frankly, than the EU AI Act. It's GDPR that is raising the complaints and blocking and being used to investigate DeepSeek, other leading AI companies. Well, the Privacy Act has never been discussed as much, and that's sort of unfortunate. We always talk about how the Privacy Act was one of the first significant privacy laws. Hey, Lee Nakashani, another old timer. Nice of you to stop by. One of the real smart people working at the intersection of tech risk and communications and product. So, when the Privacy Act hit its 50th anniversary, there were not a lot of celebrations. We held a panel and a discussion to commemorate, but it's always sort of been really important to the internal people who do compliance around it, but not something that a lot of folks who work outside of government fully appreciate. Obviously now with the DOJ, access to data, there's a whole proliferation of lawsuits and litigation. And I was at dinner this week with some privacy civil society people who got some of the cases, and they're going to be tough. The government is arguing that the DOJ folks are government employees, special government employees, but government employees, and they're on detail to the agencies, and so no different than any government employee accessing the data. Now, the Privacy Act, and again, I'm by no means an expert on it, right? But the Privacy Act isn't simply about you access data, and that's fine. I mean, exfiltrating data would be creating a new database. Privacy Act has processes to do that. We can't have secret databases. That was one of the core ideas. You have to publish and explain what's in it, and it's got to have limited purpose. And so accessing data in a very general way, exfiltrating data, right? You could certainly imagine how one could comply with the Privacy Act by having employees properly designated, properly trained, with limited purpose, fraud and efficiency and so forth being obviously appropriate purposes, going in there and doing the appropriate work. Were those processes followed is obviously the very big question. So we'll see. One question that's come up a bit, and I don't know if anybody in the audience has a clue, I don't know, but we've had a number of companies saying to us, well, what does it mean for me in terms of my compliance? Because, data about me, my customers might be accessed. I don't have a good answer for that. I don't know exactly what, if you're mandated to provide data to a government agency and now you're worried about access, what you could be doing, should be doing mean, obviously, in general, we may have issues with global data transfer flows if we can't trust that the PCLAW plays its role, if we can't trust that the FTC is independent, if we can't, be certain that the government processes are followed. But that's out of a lot of our control. We do hear a fair number of folks who have relied on Privacy Shield, reminding us that they also have SECs. And certainly if you only are relying on Privacy Shield or the data privacy framework, might be time to think about whether you need SECs as a backup. Now, look, obviously, European governments are not looking to rupture global data flows at the moment. The pressures and the pushback that we've heard from the administration around tariffs being tied even to global data flow enforcement that might be done in a way that's not fair. There's a challenging political conversation, happening. But data protection authorities are independent, and although they are influenced by, the world, they will move forward. I did not yet read. I'm going to look at it over the weekend. If anyone read it, the Norwegian DPI, I think, already put out some opinion on the state of the transfer. I don't know what they said, but obviously there are concerns, and obviously the SECs are subject to the same concerns, but we do know that the politics of it end up often focusing on the data transfer framework. The House has begun taking input for potential national privacy bill. Is it possible that with both houses being in one party, with private right off the table, that there'll be progress? Who knows? On the Senate side, Senator Cruz has said that he sees the kids' safety, kids' privacy issues, Cosma Capatuo as first. So whether there's time or appetite to get to privacy in his agenda, don't yet know. He has said that the Texas privacy bill is one to look to as a model, potential model. And on the House side, there was some criticism last time that the key sponsors really had kind of hunkered down. They had done so much debating and negotiating, and didn't really want a lot of input, even things that just technically didn't make sense about the bill, right? Where there were contradictions, where you literally could say, this says this, this is that. So are you banning advertising or not? Because we don't know. Tell us, right? And even civil society, who wanted it to be very restrictive on advertising, we're like, we're worried that it doesn't. We think it does, but we don't know. And industry was like, I don't know. We think it might not. And the staffers were like, it's obvious, right? So they really had kind of hunkered down. They were getting a lot of pressure, and didn't want to keep negotiating. And in the end, obviously, leadership was not going to move the bill forward. So the current leads have hired some savvy staff, new faces, and are, I think, trying to start, with an open mind, and are talking to us, talking to, stakeholders of every sort, and we'll know more. The preempting pressure, given the California progress, is continuing. So there's increasing industry interest in getting a bill done. Obviously, if it's broadly preemptive, it's possible you get some AI done in a privacy bill, right? If you talk about automated decisions, and in particular, if you're trying to preempt California and the automated decision type rulemaking. So who knows? Who knows what yet may happen? Let me end with just a brief comment about the states. Close observers may have seen that we pulled out of the coordinating role that we were playing for a big group of state legislators. We were playing a very basic convening role for them. This is a group that existed, before us, who were talking to each other, will continue talking to each other, but it asked us to really help facilitate their ability to get input from a broad range of stakeholders. and bipartisan. But unfortunately, what has happened is many of those legislators are now introducing bills, and some of them are closely in sync, trying to do versions of Colorado and Connecticut. Some a lot of input from industry, and you see how more pragmatic some of the bills came. Others, tough bills. Texas, strong bill. Very conservative Republican stakeholder who was not involved in the group, but didn't work his bill through the group, and is a serious legislator who passed that Texas privacy bill, and who probably will evolve his AI bill, but has real concerns, as his local stakeholders, did. But not a bill necessarily that we would support. Although again, in this process, we're just helping make things work. But some of the Silicon Valley leaders who are now more energetically in the debate, and some of the free market think tank leaders, really took aim at many of these bills, arguing that they're mini EU AI acts. It's like comparing a bicycle to like a Mack truck, or a train. When you look at, say, Virginia, which has all sorts of pragmatic things. If you comply with other national standards, you are in compliance. Only the AG can enforce rights to cure. But language obviously around automated decisions and fairness, which are kind of core to most civil rights bills, but yet were the subject of a lot of critique. And some of these bills were being called FPF bills, or FPF Biden supported, bills, and that sort of thing. And it really, I think, was becoming an albatross for some of the legislators, and just a huge distraction for us. We weren't able to, I think, convey that our role there really was helping manage a process, and helping legislators get a little smarter and get educated, and frankly, everyone have an easy opportunity to provide input to people operating otherwise in 50 states. So we pulled out. We'll still obviously provide thoughtful analysis of bills, and share our opinion as we do in a sort of technical, explaining what works, what doesn't work about bills. So we're certainly not leaving the stage, but we did need to step out of this process. A lot of stuff this week. Thanks to folks who chimed in. Lee asks a quick question: is there still largely bipartisan support for a federal bill, or has it shifted at all? There's bipartisan support for a privacy bill. The devil, comes around when you get into the details. And the big devil, and you saw this emerge when the House quashed the bill, privacy has usually not been caught up in, I don't want to call it partisan, but in the cultural policy debates. And so when we talked about discrimination, there was general consensus that you didn't want digital discrimination, just like you don't want housing and employment discrimination. Doesn't matter if it happens online. When the House leadership looked at the previous three corners bill, they said, well, wait a second, this is calling for protections on discrimination, and that can be used in ways that we don't like. And it got caught up, frankly, in what is going on today. So if there was a bare bones privacy bill, I mean, there's obviously consensus around the country with all the state laws that people should have the right to delete data, right? And there was not such a consensus years ago. And that you have, access rights, and you have certain opt-out rights, and sensitive data should be treated a bit differently, right? There are some commonalities, and there's clearly broad consensus on that. Whether or not a bare bones bill that kind of captures where there is consensus, and that does some preemption, which is obviously the industry drive, is going to be okay with maybe the Dems or states that have a law, or civil society, right? The congressional margin is still close. I mean, it's not easy to, it's not a Republican Congress. It is very split. On a bad day, when a couple of people have the flu, you don't have a majority. The proposed ambassador to the UN is not being sent up because of fear that losing like her one Republican vote, might make it hard to pass key, budget resolutions and the like. So I'd say there's bipartisan consensus that some kind of privacy law is needed. the politics of preemption and private right obviously have shifted. But whether or not it's going to be possible to do such a law without the discrimination language, I will note that Frank Pallone, at the time the Dem chair, now the minority, did continue to support the bill when the discrimination language was pulled out. All civil society no longer supported it, and then of course it was clear the bill wasn't going to go anywhere, and it was pulled from a committee hearing. So I guess I'm not surprised. I think many of us appreciate. I've long argued that the reason this is so important, privacy, it's not just about cookies and tracking and all this sort of minutia of standard contracts. It is, at the end of the day, about power. Companies have data about you, government has data about you, other people have data about you, and all the problems of the world that are playing out online intersect in so many ways with personal information, whether it's competition, whether it's content moderation, whether it's kids. We shouldn't be surprised that those issues have now intersected and are making it harder to do privacy law. When GDPR passed, I don't think anyone imagined that this was the future of AI regulation. On the other hand, look at the origins of privacy law. It was about automated databases, digitized, information and records being used, whether it was Nazi era or was the early, House Education and Welfare Agency, report. It was actually about digital decisions and power and automation being used against the individual. Advocates and I think governments understood that. I think many of us in the business side were, hey, come on, we're just providing an app. What do you mean? We're not putting anyone in jail. We're not, but I think the understanding that the data can end up in the government, or that decisions can be made by companies that really, you're dependent on, whether it's platforms or, your phone or an app or dating or whatever it is. So for better or worse, hello, privacy people, we are in the big time. We are in the big leagues now. The issues that are presidential and global and geostrategic are on us, and we are therefore going to have to navigate them in a much bigger stakes way, and that means a lot of drama. Quick note: I'll talk about this next week. Gabriela Zanfa-Fortuna and Christopher Kuhner have published a really thoughtful paper about global data flows, the changing impact of European influence given the geostrategic changes. Take a look, read it if you can, and we'll talk about it next week. Really thoughtful, deep, strategic piece. Happy Friday, everybody. Have a great weekend.